The other day, I was talking to someone else who had a 14-year-old boy, and he's at a bit of a loss. He can't go out, see his friends, he doesn't know what to do. Whereas I said, actually, Ainslie has really good self-discipline and has habits and structures his day really well. So can you tell us about that structuring?
Well, how about this? You get a list of things to do and then you do it.
Welcome to The COVID Crossing, a podcast of art, heart, hope and happenings from the Macedon Ranges northwest of Melbourne. This podcast comes from and with a faith in humanity and a belief in equality, so no one is left behind. Feelings of sadness, frustration and fear are huge at the moment. And yet, we also know we can transform them so that we cultivate a learning mindset, keep an eye out for the silver lining, and become a more equal and earth-allied society as we all make our way to the other side of the COVID crossing. G'day and welcome to the second episode of The COVID Crossing. I'm your host, Kate Lawrence. Thanks so much to all the listeners of the first episode. Your comments on social media, just amazingly heartening to hear each and every one of them and to know that you're enjoying it. So please keep them coming. Amazingly, this episode is coming only 3 days after the first episode. I set myself a goal of wanting to make a lot of audio, but sometimes you need to be careful what you wish for. I'm not sure about you, but it's just not working for me. So I've had a rethink, and here's the idea. After today's episode, we'll go to one episode a week, maybe up to an hour, published on Thursday. Each episode will have a chapter or half a chapter if it's a long one from Victoria reading The Seven Little Australians. We'll always hear from locals from the Macedon Ranges, and for the rest there'll be some variation of the seemingly endless list of segments that I like to include. So the next episode after this one will be on Thursday the 16th of April. Today on the podcast, we'll have a chat with Anne from the Macedon Post Office, as well as a conversation I had with a farmer from Macedon. We'll hear a recording of a story, a folk tale that I've told in performance, and a poem by Rumi. There's a little segment about ways of connecting to nature. Victoria and I have a chat in a segment called State of the House. And in Language Lookout, I explore some ideas about how the words we choose create the kind of world we live in, and explore some ways to choose better words. And right at the end, we'll hear a little bit more from the official interview I managed to get with Ainslie Munro Lawrence. You got a little teaser at the start. We'll hear a little bit more right at the end. So let's get started. As I mentioned in the last episode, on April the 1st, I rode up to the Macedon Post Office with my recording gear. I had been putting off the task of standing around my local shops with a microphone for a few days, but that day my son asked me and I promised to pick up a parcel he was expecting from the post office. And given that there was a new closing time of 3 o'clock, about 2:45, I got myself organised. I live about 1.5k due north of the Macedon Post Office, which is 1.5 kilometres closer to the base of Mount Macedon. There's a lot of hills. I get my parcel and I tell Anne behind the counter about the podcast, and she says she'd be happy to have a chat. So when they close up, they invite me in. I put the tripod next to the counter as close as I can, and I stand back behind the white line that's taped onto the floor. And Anne stands on the other side of the counter, surrounded by the trappings of a post office. Scales, envelopes, stamps, tape, pens, scanners, as well as the trappings of a gift shop, newsagent and souvenir shop combined. Macedon is a small town nestled at the base of Mount Macedon, and it's become a serious tourist destination in the last few years at this time of year. Our mountain climate means the colours of the trees are particularly vivid and beautiful, and Honour Avenue, which runs through the middle of the town, is lined with pin oaks planted after the war, and it turns out they are a perfect backdrop for selfies and wedding magazine pics. And the post office obliges by carrying a small range of Macedon-branded items, cards, photos, tea towels, the usual collectibles. As soon as the door of the post office is locked, some music is put on, and there's this audible sigh of a releasing tension, and we get started. So, name?
Okay, I'm Anne, and I'm the licensee at the Macedon Post Office. I've worked here for about 10 years, and I've been the licensee for 6.5. It happened suddenly. On the Saturday, there was a different mood in the shop, and we sort of weren't really across what was going on. People were a bit grumpy that aren't normally grumpy, and there was a different mood. By the Monday, it had turned more to panic, and Tuesday was the same. By Wednesday, it was someone snapped because they couldn't get their paper at 7:30 in the morning, someone who wouldn't normally behave in that manner, which was a little bit hard because it's a bit hard to see people that aren't normally like that when you try and explain why you're not open until 9 o'clock, because we're working from 7 till 9 to have a safe place and to get everything done ready. Someone else snapped because they'd missed the postie by 2 minutes, which they weren't.
What did they say?
Had that we spoil their day.
Really?
Just makes you feel a bit worthless.
Really? Oh. Rate a parcel load.
Big parcel load coming in and also going out, yep. But
right.
A bit swamped every morning now too.
With
parcels coming in.
People coming in.
Wipe our hands. We have the spray for our hands, and every time we use the machine, we wipe that down.
And is there any fear that it could come in on parcels?
Not really.
No.
And we spray anyway. We're getting screens. We're just waiting for Australia Post to give to get the screens here, and that will help a lot.
What were the screens?
No, only that I'm not sure when it's going to end, because at the moment it just feels like, not like Christmas, just sort of like you've just got to keep going to get the work done. Christmas you have a stop, and I don't know what it'll be like in 2 weeks, if people will get used to it. It's kind of hard to keep being positive when you're not really sure what's going on, really.
Back?
When I go home, I sit in the car. I don't want to go in.
In home?
Yep.
At this point, just as I can hear the tension in Anne's voice, there's this man milling about at the door saying he just wants to pick up the Herald Sun. Anne says that this happens every day at the moment as the community gets used to the new hours.
Yeah, so I sit in the car for a while so I don't go in, because you don't want to take what's been happening into the house.
And so do you feel...
Trying to keep home going and still being here, and just try to turn off when you get home.
Yeah. So COVID-19 is definitely taking its toll on the essential service that is the post office. But as always, there is the beauty of humanity.
People leaving chocolates for us in their letterbox, or bringing some chockies in or some muffins in. And then a customer has brought in flowers twice now for us to either give out on our mail run or to give to customers when they come in the shop.
Now I'd like to read a poem. It's called The Guesthouse, and it's by Rumi, a 13th century Persian poet. The The Guesthouse. This, being human, is a guesthouse. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honourably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Now it's time for State of the House.
You wouldn't want to see the state of our house physically at the moment, especially this room. It's probably a very good job you're looking out. There is Lego everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Charlie has he has gathered together every single piece of Lego that he owns. It was all in boxes, all jumbled up, but in boxes. And he has decided to sort it into colour, size, so that he can start remaking all the things that he has instructions to, which is a great idea, fantastic. But treading on Lego in the night is really uncomfortable.
Well, that's good. The state of my house is not quite as messy as that, although having started this, I this morning packed up the jigsaw that I had not done much on. I thought, I'm not going to get to that. This is my new jigsaw, putting pieces of audio together. Sam, my oldest boy, for his 21st birthday, he was given a coffee machine. Loves it. And it was been flashing up saying you need to scale and deflush this or something. And I'm like, so you got to sort that out. He's like, So have you ordered the pills? You've got to order these tablets. Anyway, he ordered all the stuff. I picked it up yesterday and he did all of it, cleaned out the whole thing. And I'm thinking, I should have given you the dishwasher too, because then you would have responsibility for cleaning that. So anyway, it's good to see. Yeah, he's 21. Just good to see them take a responsibility for something and follow through.
That was Vicky, who has been reading Seven Little Australians in the podcast, and me having a chat about life on the home front. Now I'd like to introduce a segment called Nudges from Nature. Whether that's your own nature, other people's nature, creatures, rocks, the nature of the earth, sky, or ocean, we need to pay attention and bring intention to notice, listen to, and invite nature into our lives. Here's the first instalment. Look up. Look up is an invitation to live life with a deeper connection to our surroundings and each other. It's a gentle nudge and reminder for everyone to be present and engage with the world around them and the people they share it with. It's based on the simple and profound act of looking up and out regularly. It has the potential to shape how we live and the societies we build together. When we look up and out, we enter the state of abstraction or daydreaming, conducive for creative concepts, complex problem solving, new insights, and aha moments. Our brain puts information together in new ways to find solutions, and we also improve our capacity to maintain focus with less effort, so we actually get better at thinking. The Look Up project has the power to create something new in the world by reminding us of what we all already have available to us, purely by being alive. Aliveness sits at the heart of this project. Look up. It's a loud snap of the fingers and a breath of air, a welcome reminder and a circuit breaker in life's daily flow. When the busy becomes you and your head is down, look up. It's a pause, some space, some time, a moment of realising you're alive, a moment for you to be here, really here, to see all there is to be seen, to connect, to be open, to live life to the full, looking up, tilted, open to enjoy all the fullness that can bring. Look Up is a movement based on the science and research of an Australian scientist, Dr. Fiona Kerr. You can find out more about it at the lookup.org.au website. What you've just heard is taken directly from their website. But best of all, just take a moment right now to look up. Now it's time for a story. This story is called Rumi and the Wedding. It's a story I've adapted from a rather strange Jewish story that I read in a book called A Bridge to the Other Side by Michael Berman. This retelling of mine bears little resemblance to the original. It was recorded when I told the story live in a performance at Melbourne Fringe in 2019, and I hope to bring more stories recorded live in other episodes. Here's Rumi and the Wedding. So once there was, and once there wasn't, an old woman called Rumi. And Rumi lived on the edge of the settlement of Ironbark. And the settlement of Ironbark was on the edge of a forest, and that forest was on the edge of the town of Bendigo. And Rumi had come to the goldfields as a young girl with her family from Germany, and then as a young woman she'd been married and widowed in record time. And then she just settled and grew food, vegetables for the diggings. But over time she came to grow mostly herbs, and she became renowned in the district as a herbalist and a healer. And she would be often called upon to tend the sick and the dying and the injured and the women in childbirth. Rumi was also well known for communing with the dead. They would come under cover of night at the full moon, and they'd slip into her house and they'd put some money on the shelf, and then they'd take a seat at the table, and Rumi would moan and sway, and if they were lucky she would come back from the other side with a message for them from their dearly beloved departed. Well, there was to be a wedding in the settlement of Ironbark, and it was a much anticipated, joy-filled occasion because both the bride and the groom had known some sorrow. Ada, the bride, had previously been married to Edward, who died 5 years previously from a protracted illness. And Edward was Aaron, the groom's brother. And so the coming together of Aaron and Ada was seen as a great healing for the tragedy that was the death of Edward. So on the day of the wedding, Ruby's bustling about in her house getting ready, and she hears a knock at the door, and she opens the door and she says, "Hey, Aaron, what are you doing here on your wedding day? And you're looking so distressed and out of breath. Oh, come quickly, hurry, Ruby, hurry, it's Ada. We can't rouse her. She's laid out in her bed, she's fine, she's just come, hurry." And so Ruby turns back into her house. She picks up her basket of healing and herbs, and out of the corner of her eye she sees her seance pouch on the shelf.
And she feels this urge to grab it, and she has long since stopped resisting such urges. And so she grabs it and puts it in her basket and hurries off with Aaron. And they come to Ada's house, and she's shown into the bedroom, which is quite crowded with Ada's relatives. Her parents and her grandparents and her siblings are there. And they part so that Ruby can get to the bedside. And she comes to the bed, and there is the bride, laid out, as pale as the wedding dress, sitting on the chair beside her. And Ruby picks up her hand, and it's cold. And then she leans her cheek down, and it's faint. And then she stands up and she says, "Aaron, get me a table." And so Aaron brings her a table, and then she gets her seance pouch out, and she sits down and she starts to get the things out. And the people in the room are going, "What's going on?" They're looking at Aaron. "What's going on? What is it? Is Ada going to die? What's going on?" And Aaron says, "Ruby, what's the matter? What's going on? Is Ada going to die? I haven't got time to explain to you, boy. You just have to trust me." And so Ruby then sits, and she gets out a feather and places it in the east, and she calls on the spirit of wind, of spring, of thought, of new beginnings. And then she lights a candle and she places it in the north, and she calls on the spirit of fire, of summer, of heat, of passion. And then she puts a small bowl of water in the west, and she calls on the spirit of water, of harvest, of emotions, of sunset. And then she puts a dark rock in front of her in the spirit of and calls on the spirit of the south, of darkness, of earth, of death and silence. And then she begins to moan. Oh, oh. And everyone in that room, eyes are locked on Ruby, except for Aaron, who won't take his eyes from Ada. And as Ruby moans and moans, and it gets louder and louder until it's fever pitch, they think it's going to break the windows, they might have to run from the room. Suddenly she slumps forward, and there's silence. And then Aaron says, "Oh, Ada, Ada's dead! Ada's dead! Ada!" And everyone in that room is crying and wailing and hugging. Ada takes a breath. She takes another breath. She takes a breath. She opens her eyes. She looks at Aaron, smiles. Aaron's got tears streaming down his face. And then everyone in that room is hugging and crying and laughing. And Ruby says, "So let's have a wedding then, shall we? Oh, Ruby, it's you. Oh, Ruby, you came, you saved me. Oh, thank you, Ruby, thank you." "What are you talking about, Ada? What's going on?" "Oh, Aaron, I wanted to tell you for so long. I didn't know how, but you see, when Edward was sick, he would get in these fevers, and he would say, promise me this and promise me that, and I would promise him. And then one day he said, "Promise me you won't marry." And I said, "I'm not marrying anyone, Edward. I'm married to you." But he kept on, and then he said, "Promise you won't marry Aaron. Promise you won't marry Aaron." And he was so distressed. In the end, I promised him that I wouldn't marry you. And as you know, I avoided you for so long. I kept away. I did everything I could. But in the end, it seemed more right to love you than to keep my promise to Edward. And so I said yes. But then I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept having nightmares. I kept saying, "Oh, when the wedding happens, Ada, it'll be okay. Just get through the wedding. Just get through the wedding." But then last night, I felt myself leaving my body, and there I was in the underworld, and there was hell, and Edward was there, and they said, "You made a promise," and I had no answer. But then Ruby came, and she stood in front of me, and she said, "There is no claim. A promise made to the dying to give them peace dies with them. We honour the dead for the sake of the living, not for the sake of the dead." And hell nodded, and Edward faded, and I came back to be with you. Everyone in that room turned to Ruby, and Ada's mother stepped forward and said, "Ruby, we can never repay you for what you have done for our daughter. But if you ever need anything, you have only to speak." "Enough already, enough. Let's have a wedding, shall we? A wedding, that's what we want." And so there was a beautiful, simple, joy-filled country wedding that went long into the night with feasting and dancing, until around midnight there was a small knock at the door. And there was a small boy there, and he said, "Is Ruby here? Is Ruby here? Oh, Ruby, come quickly, come quickly. Mama says Grandmama's time is near. Hurry, Ruby." And Ruby picked up her basket and went out into the night to do what she was called to do.
Now let's head back to the Macedon Post Office. Talking to Bridget was fascinating, and while she moved back and forth between the positive and the negative of the situation, much of the focus of what I've shared here is her insight into some of the big picture issues and her perspective as a farmer.
I do live in Macedon. Well, I live just out of Macedon, but I was born in Woodend. Born in Kyneton Hospital.
Right.
Went to primary school in Woodend, high school in Kyneton, then up on the mountain, and then I left the area for a little while, and now I've come back.
How long have you been back?
14, 15 years. So I think I'm a local.
You are most definitely a local. I've only been here 15 years, so a bit of a blow-in.
Yeah. Well, we are farmers. So we have a cattle and sheep property, and we have not been able to sell our stock through the markets because they've closed the store markets down for fear of spread of COVID-19. We have had to pass some wool in today because the wool market has crashed in the last 48 hours.
And what is...
How else is it impacting us? All my family are living together, bar my youngest daughter who's still working.
So how many people is that?
That's 11. And 5 of them are 3 and under.
Oh my goodness!
So we're already a close family, but we're either going to be an even closer family or not. If it hadn't rained in January and February, we would be in big trouble, but we wouldn't be the only ones.
Yes, sure.
So we're probably okay. Our cycles are all about to start happening. We've got ewes about to lamb. We've got cows calving in June, July. We've just fertilised the property. We're about to start cultivating for winter crops and summer crops. And so the cycle just keeps going. And because until yesterday or last week, stock prices have been good and wool prices have been good, we've got a bit of a buffer there so that we can keep things going. People also, I guess, with agriculture, people have to eat.
Yep.
And so as meat producers, particularly as lamb producers, I think we'll be okay. Cattle's a slightly different matter because so much of our beef is exported. Not our beef personally, but Australian beef, and that all filters down through the supply chain. Having said that, cattle herd numbers are at their lowest for decades. Sheep numbers are at their lowest for decades.
Any reason?
Oh, the drought. The drought has decimated Australia.
Yep.
The other thing, I guess, the drought, followed by the bushfires, and now this. I think we do need to dig very deep to find our strength and our resilience. Well, obviously it's going to have an extraordinary economic impact on towns like Macedon and Woodend and Gisborne, our local community. And in fact, I've just had to go up to Kyneton. And Piper Street reminds me of what it was like in the 1980s. Piper Street was always a barometer of the local economy. So all the restaurants that we've been privileged enough to enjoy are probably, you'd have to question whether or not they will come back. There are going to be a lot of local businesses that just don't make it through, and I think that's sad. I think that's really, really sad. Whilst I applaud what the government is doing, somebody's got to pay for it at some point, and it'll be our children and our grandchildren. But you can't let people starve. You can't let people not have a roof over their head. So I think they are doing everything they can, and I think they'll do more. But as I said, somebody has to pay for that at some point. But I do fundamentally believe, and I'd like to finish on a positive note, I do fundamentally believe we will come out the other side. We will be stronger because of it. We might be different, but we will be stronger. And hopefully a lot of people will find inner strengths that they didn't know that they had.
Language lookout. This segment is all about how the way we collectively use language often unwittingly creates outcomes that are unfair and we don't want. Now, I've known about this since my uni days, but it is so hard to always be swimming upstream. But my work as a storyteller and a story coach has highlighted to me how powerful language is in shaping our reality and has exposed me to some great thinkers in this area. One of them is George Lakoff, who is the author of a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. And I'm also signed up to an email list from a mob in the States called the Frameworks Institute. People thinking and working in this field talk about how the words we use become frames or boxes. They become the border or the boundaries of how we think about a topic or a group of people, and we aren't able to think or see beyond that. The frames are often hidden, they're often metaphors, and more they're being used by powerful forces to advance a world that benefits power. For today, let's have a look at the word lucky. It's so easy for me to say that I'm really lucky, but actually no. I was born into a range of privileges, affluence, part of the dominant culture, although not part of the dominant gender. I was born into a system that provided an education that suited me quite well and my academic father. And I received a so-called good education. And then I chose a profession with much status and power. I became a lawyer, albeit a community lawyer, serving people with little access to the system of justice. Overall, I received a kickstart that makes the bumps in the road of life easier for me to deal with. This isn't luck. This is a system and a culture that benefits certain groups over others. And because confidence is such a hidden influence in our lives, this system becomes self-perpetuating, even when it professes to be a democracy where anyone can get ahead. Similarly, how we speak about them, the other, and their situation, the vulnerable, that also matters. This word, vulnerable, is being used a lot at the moment, and I used it in a post I wrote on my local community Facebook page a few weeks ago, suggesting that we could offer to help those in our community who were vulnerable. It kind of felt a bit off at the time that I wrote it, but I didn't really know why. Then I received an email from the Frameworks Institute, and they suggested that we reframe this language so that we talk about how we're all in this together and that we all help each other out. They said no one wants to see themselves as vulnerable. It smacks of charity and paternalism. And it changes how we think about others who, like all of us at some time in our lives, are having a hard time.
So how has the COVID-19 virus impacted you?
Well, there's nothing on. There's nothing to do. Well, there's plenty to do, but, there's nothing on.
What do you mean there's nothing on? There's lots of movies on. What have we watched?
Oh, yeah, but there's no live sporting events on.
Yes,
so there's nothing on.
That's nothing. That means there's nothing on.
Well, yeah, I don't think you can think of anything better than that.
Yep, Ainslie's life begins and ends with sport.
Do you think that there are going to be AFL clubs that are going to go under because of this?
Not AFL clubs, but NRL clubs. Because the NRL is financially corrupt. And the AFL has a $600-something million loan, so I think they're going to be fine. NRL, which I think a few clubs may go under. Unless they figure out this new wonderful idea of putting all the teams and everyone involved on an island. I thought it was a genius idea.
And what?
So that is all for the second episode of the COVID Crossing. Thanks for making it to the end. It has been a very rushed turnaround, entirely my own doing, of course. Sincere apologies for the glitches, the distortions, the audio variation and the clipping. Oh my goodness, the clipping. There is so much to know and learn about clipping. The learning curve is very steep. The next episode, we'll be back with another chapter of 7 Little Australians and some other wacky, zany mashup of segments and ideas. Until then, keep safe. Thanks for listening to The COVID Crossing. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on iTunes and tell your friends about it and share it on social media. A huge thanks to Victoria Wells from Kyneton in the Macedon Ranges and also from the non-profit To Turn a Page. Her encouragement and willingness to participate have been crucial in getting this off the ground. And a huge thanks to the community of Macedon who've been willing to talk to me when I have a microphone in my hands. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Kate Lawrence. You can find out more about me at my website, storyground.com.au.